all that other good stuff. Okay. So this is where we ended yesterday. We ended tyranny. And again, the important part of that ending tyranny, and the only reason we discussed that, was so that we could understand how the rule of aristocrats ended and we were done. And as a result of that, new groups of people are going to be allowed to participate in government, and it's going to give us two different, really distinct styles of city-states: democracies and oligarchies. So we're going to start with what makes these two groups of people the same. So again, in that compare and contrast paper, what makes them the same would be stuff in this slide. Greek unity. Even though we have all these different city-states, what makes us the same is they speak the same language. It's very similar if we think about the United States, right? We all speak the same language to some extent. My California husband could never understand my North Carolina family for a lot of reasons. But we have that common, even though we have different customs scattered around. They honored the same ancient heroes. So they kept the same heroes. They kept the same gods. So it didn't matter if you were Spartan or Athenian, you spoke the same language. You honored the same ancient heroes. You participated in the same festivals. You prayed to the same gods. But one of the ones that bound them together more than anything is the last one. They feel superior to everyone. And again, that's why I recommend watching that My Big Fat Greek Wedding, because that's the overall theme of that movie, is the Greek dad in the middle of this wedding does everything he can to make sure everybody knows they're Greek and that they're better than everybody else, and that the Greek culture, the Greek heritage is the best. Even so much so that they had a word for non-Greeks. So if you were a non-Greek, it didn't matter where you were from, what culture you were from, you were called Barboli, which is going to morph itself into the word barbarian. Anybody ever heard that word before? It's usually not a good picture in your head when you think of someone as being a barbarian. And we use, historically speaking, this barbarians at the gate kind of issue. So anybody who could not speak Greek was to them a barbarian. Didn't matter where you were from. And this second part is going to be really important when they begin to challenge the Persians. So this again is the problem with the way that we have to study history chapter by chapter by chapter, because right now in the middle of what we're studying, Darius is making the Persian Empire the biggest, greatest empire in the world. And we're getting ready to fight that. Those of you that know the story of the 300 and you think back when you watched the movie and you kept hearing this word Darius or Darius, that's the same Persian guy that we're getting ready to fight in the Battle of Thermopylae. That's him. So in order for the Greeks to challenge this big, gigantic empire, they needed to have some kind of inflated sense of themselves and some kind of almost overinflated ego to take on this challenge of trying to defeat the Persians. And that, again, will be what makes them unified in this fight against the Persians, because they're going to fight together against the Persians. All right, so we're going to start with Sparta. So we're going to start with the location. They're on Peloponnesus. It's one of those little islands that I showed you. So it's not part of really the proper peninsula that we think of as Greek. In their government, they have 2 kings. And they have a council of elders. They have an assembly. So while they have the looks of a democracy, right, they have people representing, the king still held power over the council. Assemblies made up of male citizens. The only people that were citizens were people that were male and native born over 30. So that will be a distinct difference. We have another word, again, that sounds a lot like hoplites, which were our infantry in Sparta, and these are called helots. These are state-owned slaves. So please make sure you get that distinction. Spartans themselves do not own slaves. The city-state of Sparta owns the slaves. And the reason they need slaves is because if you are in Sparta, you have one job opportunity, and that is you're a warrior, nothing else. Spartan men are not farmers, they're not artisans, they're not anything else but warriors. And so they need slaves to do all the work. And so they have a lot of them. The helots are going to outnumber Spartans everywhere. In every place, there are going to be more helots than Spartans. So what is the fear then? Because there's more slaves, that there could be a revolt or an uprising. So what they have to do, and what they do, is two things. One, they keep those helots work to the point of exhaustion. They give them a minimal amount of food. They give them minimal amount of clothing against the elements and shelter against the elements. In other words, they barely keep them alive so that they can work but have no energy, no power to overthrow. The second thing they need to do is get lots of slaves, which requires them to be a conquering group of city-states constantly. So those helots are an essential part of running Sparta, because they're the ones growing food, they're the ones building bridges, because in Sparta, you can't be anything but a warrior. All Spartans prepared to be part of the military state. Sickly children left to die. So let's talk about that part. And I'm going to leave this up for a while, so let's stop writing for just a second. How many of you know, because some of you know or don't know, when you were born that you weighed less than 7 pounds? Please stand up. If you weighed less than 7 pounds when you were born, please stand up. You guys don't know that? Anybody know? Nobody knows? Some of you know. Oh, just stand up. I'm not going to throw anything at you. Just stand up. If any of you knew or know that you were sickly when you were born, that you ended up in the NICU, you ended up in an incubator, any of those things, please stand up. Oh, we're just going to throw you guys off the cliff. Okay. So this is what happens. I would be standing too. I'll stand because I was under that weight. So it'll be me. So the three of us, if we were born in Sparta, would have been left to die. And so what that means, we can sit down now. What that means is a Spartan mother would have had to give her baby over to the Council of Elders and would have went and thrown him off a cliff or left them. Why? We don't need sickly children with bad DNA in our Spartan warrior society. Don't need it. Not going to have it. Going to go away. The Greeks are also going to be our first dramatists, our first playwriters. And one of the plays that's written about this time period is called Oedipus Rex. And so the play of Oedipus Rex, you can go back to writing and you can listen to me now. The play of Oedipus Rex begins with just what that scene I said. The king's wife had a son, and they came and asked for the oracle to come and read the future. Think Sleeping Beauty, right? Sleeping Beauty, the three little witches weren't invited, and they come and give the fortune of the princess. So that's what's happening in Oedipus Rex. In Oedipus Rex, the oracle comes to tell the future of this boy prince. And the oracle rolls eyes back in her head and says, this child is going to bring destruction to your house. He is going to kill his father and marry his mother. And everyone at the party's like, whoa, that's outrage. We must kill this child. So the huntsman, who is tasked with killing this child, takes child up to the woods, into the craggy mountains, and is supposed to kill it, kind of like a la Snow White is supposed to get killed. I'm trying to make the connection that Greek stuff is everywhere. And what happens with Snow White? Does he kill her? He does not. The huntsman does not kill the baby either. He's like, I can't kill this baby. It's so cute. I'm just going to leave it here and let it die by itself. So he leaves it on top of this craggy hill. As the huntsman goes back and tells the mom and dad, dead, kid's dead, we don't have to live that scene. A old grandpa goes by with his goat cart and hears a squalling baby and said, oh my gosh, the gods have looked down on us. My wife and I have never been able to have children. Here's the perfect child. Puts him in his goat cart and takes him home to his wife, and they raise this baby. As what happens with most children that are raised by older parents who are tired and can't provide proper discipline, the little boy rides over the top of, just like you guys, your grandparents give you everything, right? Like they don't tell you you can't do stuff. That's like what this is. It's hard being an old person with little kids. So he runs roughshod over them, starts hanging out with the wrong crowd, gets involved with some thieves, and they tell this young gentleman, now as an early young man, we've got a prime target. This giant caravan is going through these crossroads. It's a perfect place for a setup and a robbery. We're going to hit them, rob. This might be the last time we ever have to rob anybody. He's like, I'm in. They go, they hit the crossroads, they steal. But what this kid did not know is that they were also going to kill people. And that was a little bit above and beyond what he felt that he could do. But in the process, he needed to defend himself, got in the fight, killed some of the people. The other kids dispersed, and now he's left standing there. And he, at this time in his little head, says, hey, here's time for me to change my life. I'm going to go take this king's body back and say that I helped, and maybe I can change my life around. So he carts back the king to the place where he reigns, goes in sobbing, I found your king dead on the side of the road. I tried to fight them off. They proclaimed him a hero. He moved in. He starts flirting with the queen. Anybody get where you think this story might be going already? He starts flirting with the queen. She falls in love with him. They get married. And about 5 years into this marriage, the oracle comes back. She sees him. Her eyes roll back in her head. And she said, I told you what was to come to pass. You have done it. You have married your mother and killed your father. That was the baby. Of which then Oedipus Rex goes out to the steps and stabs his eyeballs out on the steps of this great palace. Hence, that's Greek drama and Greek tragedy. Hence, anybody interested in going into psychology or forensic science, there is a complex called Oedipus Rex. And that complex is when boys like their moms a little too much. Hence, this is Greek stuff. At age 7, so boys, I want you to think back to age 7. You were probably in the 2nd grade. Age 7 is about 2nd grade. That is when your military training will begin. The first process is you leave your home and you move into the barracks. 2nd grade, most of you, I would assume, at some point, when you tried to spend the night in the 2nd grade, you got the classic stomach ache at 1:30 in the morning and somebody had to come pick you up. I know it happened. I spent many 1:30 in the morning on these Sullivan roads going to pick up my kids. You promise you're going to stay the night tonight? Yeah, Mom, I love staying there. My stomach hurts. 7, you are moving into a barracks. You don't get to go home. You don't live with your parents anymore. Rigid discipline to become a soldier. Was today the day you read about the Spartan soldier and the Spartan kid? Just staple it and turn it in there. Was that today? Okay, that must be Monday's bell question. So at the age of 7, they're going to do the same thing to those 7-year-olds as they do with the helots. you're not going to get enough food to eat. You don't get shoes. You don't get good clothing because you are supposed to survive. The goal is to teach you to survive. The goal is I got to get food. I'm going to steal food. If I can steal food and not get caught, you're awesome. If you steal food and get caught, you're going to get whipped. This is a place where bullying is encouraged. It is a horrific way to grow up as a child. However, it creates strong, battle-ready warriors. At age 20, males could marry, but still have to live in the barracks until they're 30. So for Spartan women, until they're 30, their husbands do not live with them. They're in charge of everything, which is why Spartan women have a little more independence than other women. All Spartan men eat in the barracks. Every single meal you eat in the barracks. And that, again, creates this bond. It creates a bond that's stronger than your actual family at home. And that's what you need when you're a warrior, right? That you have the back of the person, of your warrior tribe next to you, that you would go to the ends of the earth to protect your the men that you're fighting with. And that's what this military life does. Women in Sparta. This is why I would not want to be a woman in Sparta, because you have to exercise. Because Spartan understood that healthy moms had healthy babies. That's not a new thing. So it was on the women to produce healthy children. Women in Sparta will be allowed to inherit property. And as I said, because one of two things, their men are still in the barracks until they're 30, or they're off fighting all the time, women were responsible for the family affairs. And Spartan women were harsh. You either won the war that you were in, or you came home dead on your shield. No losers. None. So my husband comes home to me as a winner of this war, or you come home dead. That's it. It's harsh. So what are the Spartan ideals? Obviously, military and stern discipline. I always ask, not at this point, but we'll get to a point in this world history course where I ask people, how many of my students have to make their beds every day before they come to school? How many of you have to make your bed before you come to school? There's usually not anybody that has to make their bed. That's not a thing anymore. Last year I had 2 kids that raised their hand, and they were like outraged that they were the only 2. They were twins. They were outraged. They were like, you guys don't have to make your bed. I'm like, I know. The thing about being a military kid was, every kid had to make their bed. Like we had, my dad every morning before we left for school checked our beds. If it wasn't made right, and we did it again. That's military stern discipline. Do you know how hard it is for me not to make my bed every day? It's hard because it's such drilled in your head. They isolated themselves from other Greeks, did not want to ruin their gene pool. If you were a Spartan woman, your only choice of marrying was a Spartan man. They did not marry from other groups for the reason that they did not want to ruin their gene pool. They looked down on trade and wealth. They looked down on that. And there was no trade. There was no wealth. There was Spartans not allowed to travel. And there was absolutely no use for art. There was no music. There was no art produced. There was no architecture. No use for art at all. Spartans, and most people agreed that Spartans weren't allowed to travel, was probably because they wouldn't come back once they went somewhere else and saw what life was like somewhere else. And the quote that most other Greek city-states used for Spartans was that, of course, Spartans are willing to die for their city because they have no reason to live for it. There was nothing fun about being a Spartan. Nothing at all. So those of you that have written somewhere or talked about how important music is in your life, no music. Zero. Nada. None at all. So that's Sparta. Athens could not be more opposite. First of all, we are in Attica. This year in freshman English, you're going to read one of my most favorite books. It's my top 5 book. I've probably read it probably 30 times, To Kill a Mockingbird. I absolutely love that book, and I get so excited when you guys get to read it because it's awesome. And one of the main characters in the book of To Kill a Mockingbird is a lawyer named Atticus. And feel free when you're talking about that book, when you're discussing it, to throw out to Mrs. Flath, like, is there any connection with the symbolism of Atticus being named after Attica, the birth of democracy? Because the whole book is about this. He's a lawyer and who he defends. It is, purposely. Their government is completely different. They got 500 people that must serve in their assembly. They're chosen at random from the assembly. Prepared laws to be considered by the assembly, supervise the day-to-day work of the government. So that's the top. So they choose 500 people to do all these things, to run the laws, and they're chosen at random, a draw of the hat. They typically serve about 6 to 8 months, and then they do it again. The assembly is made up of every single male citizen in Athens. They all have to participate. They debate every law before approving and rejecting. That's real democracy. The United States of America does not have real democracy. We don't have the time or wherewithal to vote on every single thing. We are a representative republic, which is why when we say the Pledge of Allegiance and to the republic, we can't be a democracy, because that would mean, how many of you live in the city limits of Sullivan? If you live in the city limits of Sullivan, that means every single time the city council took up a proposal, every single citizen of Sullivan would have to vote, rather than their little vote of the 7 of them that represents the citizens of Sullivan. So if in Sullivan County, the county commissioners, for those of us that live in the county, something that I would love to see passed, I bring up a bill that dogs should not be allowed to ride in the back of pickup trucks. I know you think it's fun for them, but I promise it is not fun for them sliding around in that pickup truck, because they can't catch hold and they are in a dangerous, dangerous place. Please don't ride around with your dogs in a pickup truck. And don't tie them to something either, because they're going to flip over the side and choke themselves. Dogs should not be in the back of pickup trucks. That's my law. I would like to have that law. If we were a democracy, that would mean every single person in Sullivan County would have to vote for that. And hopefully you can see nothing would get done. All we would be doing is voting. So we have a representative democracy. This assembly thing is going to take up all the time of the men that live in Athens. And eventually they're going to have to change it. Eventually they have to change it. Who becomes a citizen in Rome? Rome, in Athens. Only land-owning men. That's it. No women, no slaves, no merchants, and no one whose parents were not citizens. Both parents. So citizenship, again, is a very awesome responsibility given out to only those men owning land. Despite this, Athens gave more people access to the decision-making process in government than any other ancient civilization. They also had a way to ostracize people, very much kind of sort of like Survivor. I don't know if anybody watches Survivor. It's been on an eternity. But they had the very similar thing where if people in Athens, they felt like they were a detriment to the society, you could be voted out. It was called ostracize. And they would take a vote, and if you got so many black stones, you're kicked out. You had to leave Athens. Women had a very, very sheltered and restricted life. Shared no political life. Women must be guided by men in all things. The few choices that women were allowed to make were dictated by men. None. The only real thing that they played a major role in was religion, making sure that gods were honored, making sure sacrifices were given, and to manage households. And again, we're talking about wealthy women, not poor women here. Rarely seen in public. Women were not allowed to go out in public alone. They had to have a chaperone at all time. Only boys were educated. And this is an essential part, again, of the continuation of a Greek legacy, is what they studied. They studied music, poetry, public speaking. Excuse me. Everything in our education system has a stronghold in Greek education system. We are the study of liberal arts is Greek. If you go to a public university anywhere in the United States to get a 4-year degree, you're going to have to take a public speaking speech class. You have to. There's no way you can get out of it. My encouragement is that you take it here with Mrs. Greggs in a class of 40 versus a class of 200. Public speaking is a required course. Why? Because the Greeks said it was important. The fact that you have, as a high school, I think maybe we're getting away from it with the tech diploma, but forever, in order to graduate high school, you had to have a fine art, which for someone like me that have no fine art bones or bodies parts in them was torturous. And hopefully some of you should say, why the heck do I have to have a music or art class to graduate high school? Because the Greeks said so. Why in English class are you made to give presentation and speeches? Why is that part of the English standard? That's why Mrs. Flath has you do those assignments, because she's required by the state of Indiana. Why? Because the Greeks said people should know how to speak. Everything about our system of education is to the Greeks. And until the 1960s, so those of you that have great-grandparents that graduate before the 1960s, they probably had to take one math class and one science class, and that was it. It's why your grandparents can probably recite all kinds of poetry, right? I had to recite once a month. Once a month, we had to memorize a work of poetry and say it out loud. Why? Because the Greeks said we should. And so in that aspect, that Greek heritage and that Greek culture has lasted a really long time. I think I'm going to do 2 more. Greek religion. Religion affects all aspects of Greek life. And please put a big, is that not what's next? Okay, what's next? What is it? Challenge of Persia. Okay, let's just stop there then. I'll get it fixed. All right, so your assignment for today and Monday is a chart on Canvas, much like the other charts that we have done, where you're going to take all this information, put it in the chart. Your writing assignment then asks you, where would you rather have lived and why? You can choose, again, because of the nature of the subject. You don't have to be the gender that you are assigned. If you want to be a male Spartan, you can do that. If you want to be a female Athenian, you can do that. Just make sure you tell me you would like to live in Sparta as a male or a female. Tell me what your life would be like and why you made that choice. It is always very interesting to me because what people choose. I never, hardly ever predict right what people will pick. My little cutesy girls want to be in Spartans. I want to be warriors. I'm like, that's not what I would think. All right, so questions about any of that? All right, we are done then for the day. Any questions about Athens, Sparta?